Let's take a look at how to make this part. And so I could start with a circle, but because of this little 90-degree dimple in here, I think it will make it easier if I start from a rectangle. So I'm going to go to the XY plane and I'll start a new sketch, and I will then draw a rectangle. I'll go up from the origin, and I'm going to change this line to a center line, and then I'll dimension the diameter from here to the center line as the 44.875. And then I'll dimension the width of this as 10 millimeters. Notice it turns dark, it's all fully constrained. And then I'm going to draw a line at an angle here. Be careful, don't get the midpoint here and don't get the midpoint there. So I'll come over here and I'll put that line about like that. And then I'll dimension from the center line up to this point, and I'm going to dimension that as 3, and I'll put an angle dimension in here, and because I'm doing half the angle, I'll do it as 45 rather than the 90 degrees. Alright, I want to be able to change the size of this dimension, so I'm going to give that a dimension a name. So I'm going to double click on that, and I could have done this when I originally created it, but I'm going to call that punch underscore DIA and then equal punch underscore DIA 3 millimeters. And if I want to see that dimension, the variable, if I come down here to tolerances and I click on that arrow and I go to expression, we can see that this has a variable named punch diameter. I'll then do revolve, so I'll go to 3D model and I'll do revolve, and I'll select just this area minus the triangle, and I'll get the center line and I'll say OK to that. And so here is my punch diameter. I'm going to go ahead and put a material on this, so maybe I'll call that stainless steel. And I'll go down and find my stainless steel. Oops, I went to edit instead of, let's put that into our part, and I need to assign that, so I'll click here and make that the stainless steel. I did steel mild, let's put that on stainless steel. Okay, let's save this, and I called this die, D-I-E. Now I want to make this into an intelligent part, or an iPart. So I'm going to go to the Manage tab, and I've got these dimensions, so I want to put different dimensions for this. So let's go ahead and expand this so I can see this. And I'm going to tell it to create an iPart, and I want to be able to change that punch diameter variable. Now notice I could change any variable. In this case it's only the punch diameter variable, so I clicked that variable and it moved it over here, and I'm going to make that a key variable as well. So I click here and you see that blue key. Now, so my first one is 3 millimeters. I'm going to right click on this row and I'll say insert a row, and I'm going to do this 5 more times. So I'll do insert a row so that I have a total of 6 rows. And then for the second one, I'm going to change this to 4 millimeters. And for the third one, I'll change it to 5, and so forth. So this will be 6, and this one will be 7, and this one will be 8. Now we can put ranges of variables that this number can be, or range of numbers. There's several different ways we can identify. In this case we put discrete specific values in for each one of those. Now I'll save this, and if I come over here and I look at the top of the browser, we see there's now this table, and if I expand that table, if I double click on the number 6, we'll see that punch gets bigger. If I double click on any size, it changes to that particular size. We only adjusted one dimension, but we could have many different dimensions in a part that we have as part of the table, that we just select the sizes that we want from that table. Let's look at how to create this part in SolidWorks. Now I could start with a circle, but because of this 90-degree dimple in the center, I think I will start with a rectangle. So I'm going to go to the front view and I'll start a rectangle at the origin. I'll go up to the right and I'm going to change this horizontal line at the origin to a construction line. And then I'm going to dimension from this center line up to this line, and I'm going to put in that, make sure you get below the center line, and I'll put that in as the 44.875. Okay, so that distance is 10. And then I'm going to draw a line across here at an angle. Now be careful when you draw that line. Don't snap to the midpoint here. Don't snap to the midpoint up there. So I'll get over about right here and I'll come up to about right there. I'll then dimension the angle between this line and the center line as 45 degrees. And then I'm going to dimension from the center line, and make sure you do from the center line, not this point. I'll do from the center line up to this point right here. I'll get below the center line and I'm going to dimension this as 3. But I'm going to come up here and I'm going to change the name of this variable. So I'm going to override the default name and I'm going to call this punch underscore DIA. And then down here on this 3, let's put an equal sign in front of that to make that a function. So I'll do equal punch diameter equal 3. I'll say OK to that. So notice there's a summation symbol on here, and if I double click on it, we see that that's punch diameter in sketch 1, the summation symbol equals 3. I then am going to revolve this. Now because it isn't a closed profile, we'll have to tell SolidWorks to close it, or we could just draw a line across here. So I'm going to do revolve, and I will select contour this area right in here. I don't want this to be a thin feature, so I'll uncheck thin feature. We see that it previews the revolve. We'll say OK to that. I will assign a material to this, so I'll go to the materials and I'm going to edit that material. I'll change this to a stainless steel, maybe a chrome stainless steel. Alright, then I'm going to come up here. When I get the mouse changes to this double bar right here, I'm going to drag this down about to here, and we see now that we have 2 feature trees. But I'm going to come to this one and I'm going to select Configuration Manager. And let's go ahead and save this part. I'm going to save this part as DIE. And then I'm going to come to this Die Configurations node and I'm going to right click and I'm going to tell it to add a configuration. I'm going to call this Configuration 1, and I'm going to do that 5 more times. So I'll do add a configuration and I'll do 2. We could put a description in there if we like. I'll do add configuration and I'll do 3. And I'll add configuration 4. And I'll add configuration 5. And I'll add one more configuration 6. Okay, so I have 6 configurations listed here, the default configuration and then 6 configurations which I just made. Notice the green check mark number 6 is active. I'm going to come up here to the annotations folder. I'm going to right click and I'll say display feature dimensions. And we see the dimensions that we used in sketch number 1. I want to get that, that 3 that's down in here, and I'm going to drag that 3 out here where I can see it. And for configuration number 6, I want that diameter to be 8. So I'm going to double click on that diameter and I'm going to set that value as 8. And when I set that, I don't want that to be in all of my configurations. I'm going to click on this down arrow and tell it I want that to only be 8 in this configuration. And I'll accept that. And now if I finish that, and if I double click on number 1, it will be the 3. If I double click on the number 6, it will tell me it needs to rebuild that, and it changes that to the number 8. So I'm going to double click on number 2, and I'll double click on this dimension. I'm going to make this distance 4, the diameter for this one, and only for this configuration. I'll accept that. I'll accept the dimension change. I'll go to number 3, and I'll change this one to 5, and only for this configuration. I'll accept that, and I'll change this one to 6. Accept that. We'll change this one to 7. And we'll say OK to that. And so now if I double click on any one of these configurations, it will change it to the configuration for that particular size. And after we've updated it for any one of them, it won't come up with this rebuild message again. So notice if I come down here, we've already rebuilt this one, so it just rebuilds it. Now I'm going to hide that dimension, and then later on when we put this into our assembly, we can put it in as the different sizes. So I will go back up to the annotations, and I'll right click, uncheck, show feature dimensions. And so that completes this part.